Welcome to Season 3 of the Soundstage Audiophile Podcast. Last year, host Jorden Guth got a crash course in the fundamentals of hi-fi from enthusiasts, journalists, manufacturers, and music industry professionals alike. Those lessons will continue, but this year, Jorden will also get a history lesson from the legends who were there from the giddy-up and who made hi-fi what it is today. So with that out of the way, here's Jorden and this week's guest.
Hello and welcome to the Soundstage Audiophile Podcast. Today we are joined with Dennis Berger, the producer of this podcast, to talk about an article that he recently published. I believe it will actually be this week by the time this podcast gets launched, where he talks about what's in the middle of hi-fi equipment and why this may or may not be important for new folks coming into the audio world. So welcome, Dennis.
Thank you, Jorden. It's a pleasure to be here, man. Well, I say that I'm here every episode, but
it's a pleasure to be in front of the scenes behind the instead of behind the curtain.
Yeah.
So this is a really interesting article in that it kind of hits a bunch of points that I've felt myself, and I'd like to kind of dive into it a little bit more. But before I ask a whole bunch of questions and pick your brain and do all of that, maybe kind of give us a little bit of a breakdown of what this article is referring to and maybe even just the title, because I think I missed that.
Yeah, I think it's called something like The Stuff in the Middle. But a lot of people might know this about me, but I have an engineering background. Most importantly, I have an engineer's brain. And the thing that a lot of people don't understand about the brain of an engineer is that, like, if you tell an engineer, hey, go build a box, that engineer will sit in a corner thinking about that box for 385 years and still not know what to do, right? But if you tell an engineer, hey, I need a box that's 1 foot by 1 foot, and I need it to do this, this, and this, and I need it to come in under this budget, they'll be like, I'm on it, right? So every month I kind of end up with this crisis where, like, there are literally 983 billion things I could write about. Which one do I do? And I kind of lean on Soundstage founder Doug Schneider to be like, you should write about this. And is always has great ideas, So I guess it was maybe about 6 months ago or so. He made an offhand comment of like, you should write an article about the stuff in the middle, because people just don't know what the stuff in the middle of a hi-fi system is. They know what source devices are. Like, they understand what a record player is. They understand what a CD player is. They understand even what a streamer is, right? They get what speakers are. Like, that makes sense. Everybody, you say speaker and everybody goes, I know what you're talking about, right? But what goes between those two things? Like, and when we were growing up, Doug and I, not you, when you were growing up 15 minutes ago, but when Doug and I were growing up, most people, when you went into their house, they would have a stereo system, and it was a stack of gear, and it was typically, it was a record player, and maybe it was just a stereo receiver, which would be, a radio tuner, preamp, and amplifier built into one box, what we would call an integrated amp today, but with a radio tuner built in.
Yep.
Or maybe it was all separates, and you could kind of tell, who is your more well-to-do friends, because they had more boxes, right?
Yep.
But typically speaking, people had familiarity, even if you weren't an audiophile, even if you weren't a hi-fi enthusiast. At some point in your life, you're going to be in the house of somebody that's got a stereo system, right? So you kind of have a concept of what goes between the thing that you put a disc in or on and the box that makes sound go oomph, right? You kind of vaguely knew what went in the middle. And these days, Doug's premise was, people just don't know what's the stuff in the middle. They have no idea. And I was like, interesting. What do I do with that idea? And it just sort of, the answer to that question came organically. So I go to the YMCA every day. I start every day with a swim, half-hour swim. And I talk to a lot of people there. They know what I do for a living. I've become the guy that knows about this stuff. And one day I was having a conversation with the young woman that works at the front desk. And we were talking about music, because that's most of what she and I talk about. And I just realized I had an answer to that question. And I just asked her, like, hey, is sound important to you? And it's like, yeah, I mean, obviously I knew it was. And if I gave you a record player today, would you know what you needed to do to make sound come out? And But actually backing up, I started with a question for her of like, hey, say I was at your house hanging out and you wanted to play music for me. Like, how would you do that? She's kind of like, put my headphones on your head. Duh. Like, what are you talking about, old man? And I'm like, no, like out loud where we get to listen to music together. And she's like, I mean, I have this crappy little Bluetooth speaker. I guess I could play that. And that's when we started talking more about like sound quality. And I know she hates the Bluetooth speaker. It sounds like crap, but it's kind of like she is interested in better sound. She appreciates better sound. But what does that even look like? Like, what is that? And I'm realizing it's just sort of this thing where she kind of always assumed she knew what some of the stuff was until I asked her, and she realized, God, I don't even know. I don't even know what I don't know. She's like, honestly, I think I would just come to you and could be like, what do I buy and how do I hook it up? You know? And that led me to having more conversations with more people at the Y and just realizing that Doug had a point, man. Almost everybody knows what a speaker is. And they know the distinction between like an Amazon Echo device or a Sonos and like a proper big boy wooden speaker that needs to be driven by an amplifier. Like they understand the distinction. They know what real hi-fi speakers are, right? They know what record players are. They know what CD players are, but almost universally, people are just baffled by what comes in the middle. So.
And there's so much to unpack there, because there's also the added layer that in systems nowadays, some of that stuff in the middle is not actually in the middle. Like when you get a speaker system, like we just did
like an active speaker system, like the KEF, what is it, the
LS60s,
LS60s,
LS60s, but the LS50 wireless,
right? Yeah,
the LSX. Yeah. I did the review, the Soundstage practical audiophile video review on the PSB Alpha IQs, which are an amazing system. So much so that I ended up buying them, which was a fun little present to myself.
Wow, you've become an audiophile cliche, Jordan.
Oh, dude.
You have become a cliche.
It's pretty funny because my wife's like, do you really need another set of speakers? I'm like, they're really good and it's so easy to work with. And like, it just, as much as I love them for the living room and the listening room and all of that, I actually have them hooked up in my TV space as home theater. Yeah. Anyways, we'll get into all that.
HDMI ARC, right?
It has HDMI ARC, which so
you just control it with your TV remote, man.
With my Apple TV remote, and it makes my life so much easier. I don't get phone calls from my wife when like I'm out and she's trying to do something, and the Bose system that I had previously set up, the remote wasn't working, or my kid hid the remote, or whatever it was. Yeah. So anyways, it just made it so much easier, and the sound quality was absolutely fantastic. And now upstairs, when I want to like jam out when I'm doing laundry or something, I actually have a really nice set of speakers. So
heck yeah.
Anyways,
it makes your life better, doesn't it? I mean, it literally makes your life better.
For so many reasons. One, audio quality, massive step up from the Bose system that I previously had. Unmeasurable improvement from the built-in speakers on the TV. But then the ease of use, which is what really gets me, which is where I'm going to go a little bit. But taking it all back, that speaker system, there's stuff in the middle, but it's built in. You don't see it.
Right.
So for a lot of folks, like, I don't blame somebody in their 20s or even 30s. I'm in my 30s. I'm a kid of the 90s. I remember the all-in-one systems. Like my first system was this little, I'm going to call it a boombox. I think the speakers were detachable, but
executive desktop system is the way we would have referred to them back in my day.
There you go. Right. So I mean,
system is the key word. You went and bought, and you like the price tag on the box. This is what you paid, and you took it home, and you had a whole thing, right? And you didn't have to, because there was an instruction manual that went plug this here and go there, and now I can make sound come out of my system, right? So it was a system. You purchased a system.
It was all in one, and like even just thinking back on this, and then thinking about the current state of hi-fi, there is kind of that distinction in products, the separates versus the all-ins and whatever. I guess the first question that I have is, I resonate with the idea that she doesn't know what she doesn't know. I fully resonate with that, because coming into hi-fi as a hobby, you start kind of going down a rabbit hole of, I like good sound. How can I make better sound? Like, why would I pay this? That seems outrageous. And then you're like, oh, that's actually pretty reasonable for what it provides, and on and on and on. There's so many unknowns. The first thing that I'm going to kind of pose to you and just ask, I don't know if you have an answer, but it's like, whose responsibility is it to kind of educate the consumer or the next generation of hi-fi folks, the people that would presumably bring this hobby forward?
Well, it's mine. For
Naturally.
one, it's yours. It's, it's Doug's, it's Sound Stages. But the thing is, like, I think man, I really hate it when you ask good questions that I don't have good answers to. But let me fumble through this. I mean, I think a large part, it's our industry. My friend Aaron Hardison, who runs Aaron's Audio Corner, great YouTube page that everybody should check out. He made a point the other day in a review that he did, talking about sort of how different speakers might require different setup, and maybe a speaker has a different acoustic center. But by that I mean, where should your ear be relative to the tweeter? Should it be above? Should it be below? Like our friend Paul Barton with PSB, he designed his really speakers to be, danceable, so you could stand up and they still sound great. So with those speakers, your ear should be above the tweeter, and in fact, he designs them to where like a foot above the tweeter is perfect, right? Yeah. I recently reviewed a speaker where, to the best of my ability to understand it, the acoustic center was below the tweeter, and so. The point that Aaron was making is like, man, some of these companies are failing of just giving me basic setup information, because every speaker needs a different distance from the back wall. Every speaker behaves differently with regard to toe in, whether the tweeters are pointed straight at your face or are they pointed straight out into the room to where they're firing either side of your head. And he's just like, man, these companies need to do a better job of actually telling me how to set up their speakers, because I have to figure it out every time. And how is normal people going to figure this out? Yep. But so I think part of it is on the manufacturers to educate better, but also I think there's a bigger problem here. Hi-fi is a shrinking hobby because it is not necessary the way it once used to be. Like, I mean, you got to think, when I was a kid growing up, we had 3 TV channels, and a lot of times there just probably wasn't much you watched. So it was normal for normal people just to spend a lot more time with their hi-fi systems, because everybody had a hi-fi. Like, I didn't know anybody without a stereo when I was growing up, even if it was just a console. Most of them were, but it was just normal and we were exposed to it. And so there's a cultural problem of people just aren't exposed to it. But therefore, I think we need to compensate, and we need to make it all more inviting and more digestible. But I think the problem with that is a lot of our industry and a lot of the people who write about this hobby have taken a more insular approach. We are shrinking, therefore it is becoming more niche. So we're going to put up gates. We're going to be gatekeepers because we're better than the people who don't understand this. We're smarter because we understand these terms like imaging and soundstage. Well, that's awkward, but yeah. And the normies don't. So we're just better than them. And so a lot of us are just not making it more inviting. So I think it's an industry problem on the manufacturer's end. I think it's an industry problem on the journalism end, and I think it is a friend problem in, look, man, and I'm as guilty of this as anybody. Most people come to my house to spend time with me. They don't see my stereo system, because now my stereo system is off in the back of the house in a dedicated room where I work. Whereas when I was a kid, it would be in the room where everybody would gather. And so maybe we just need to do like you did with the speakers that you connected to your TV, where people walk in and they look and, ooh, what's that? How's this different from a sound bar? So those of us who are in the hobby and appreciate the hobby and know how important it is, maybe we just need to expose our friends to it more. So I don't think there's one answer to your question. I think it's a big problem to be solved, and I'm not going to solve it with one freaking article.
Yeah. And I guess it was more to kind of pose it to get the thought out there than to actually answer it. Because when I was thinking about this before we spoke, my immediate thought was, well, I know from my buying habits, when I go to a brand's website and they explain the technology, I always have to kind of sit back and say like, okay, I know that the marketing department, for the most part, has had a huge say in whatever's being published. So there might be something there, but I don't know if the spin or the kind of presentation of whatever it is exactly what I actually need. And I think audio is interesting because there is so many different approaches to something, and everyone seems to be getting to similar answers when we're talking about like frequency response and all this other stuff, where a lot of people make really good stuff, but they approach it very differently. So as a new person going to the hobby, like, do I choose drivers from company A or company B for the speaker system? And then you amplify that, pun, even further when you start talking about this stuff in the middle, because I don't know what resistors or transducers or whatever it may be are going to give me better sound quality. Is it
Well, you don't need to know that. I mean, for the large part, that's just all marketing gobble. Well, not the transducers are the things that convert one form of energy to another kind. So that would be your speaker drivers and things like that. But the other stuff with the caps and resistors, I mean, that might affect the longevity of your electronics, but it's not going to affect what you hear. But hey, that doesn't sell ads, man. And that doesn't sell magazines. Well, not that we're selling magazines anymore, but that's a boring answer. And people want it's the narcissism of small differences. People want those caps and resistors to make a huge difference. And they've convinced themselves that it does. And I think that's another reason that normies have just checked out, because it's like, one of the things that Angelica has said to me before about her problem with getting engaged with hi-fi journalism, even as passionate as she is about sound, is she said to me, you guys make mountains out of molehills and molehills out of mountains. You're treating the important stuff like it's superfluous, and you're treating the superfluous stuff like it's the most important thing in the world. So it's an issue of priorities. But yeah, that's what happens when you're in a shrinking insular hobby.
Well, okay. So this actually goes to an article that Jeffrey Morrison wrote on Soundstage Solo, which was talking about exactly this. It's like, do people really care about the features that all these companies are selling when it comes to headphones? And it's that exact idea. And like, I was thinking about that as well. And the answer for me is like, I bought a set of AirPod Max giant headphones when they came out years ago, already knowing that they didn't have the best sound quality. But what it did have was ease of use technology that just made the experience that much better. I'll give you an example. Like, I can use my phone, and then I turn on my Apple TV, and my headphones automatically connect to the audio source of the Apple TV. So I don't need to switch. Same with my computer, same with my iPad. Like, that automatic switching is just there. Seamless. No messing back and forth with Bluetooth or anything like that. The other examples are like the Find My technology, where if you lose them, you can find them. Whatever it may be, these ease of use things, I get use out of that every single day.
Yeah.
Where I don't know that if I was going to spend the money on headphones, I would get the value of that highest quality audio as often as I would by getting the value of that ease of use.
But you could have both. You can have both.
You can have both.
Right. So
you can absolutely have both. But I guess what I'm getting at is when you talk about some of these companies and kind of bring this back to what's in the middle and all that, I feel like some of these companies are almost keeping it. They're not going towards that ease of use aspect. They're maybe not adapting as much to kind of what people need in the ease of use space, and you might be losing people.
Because you know what? I have thoughts on that, but I tell you what, let's take a break real quick. I'm taking your job away from you, man. Do it. American immigrants taking your Canadian job. So let's take a break and come back, and I have thoughts on that. We'll drill down into that.
Okay. And welcome back to the Soundstage Audiophile podcast. Just before the break, I posed another question to Dennis, which was effectively asking, do hi-fi companies cater to those ease-of-use technology features that would bring people in, or are they kind of reserved in keeping things more, I'm going to say old school, for lack of a better term there, in terms of the kind of functionality that these components bring? And is that turning people off or not engaging people enough to get into the hobby?
That is a fascinating question, and I'm sorry, I had to take a powder break, and I wanted to give this question its full due. Somebody said something lately that stuck in my brain, and I forgot who said it, but knowing me, it's probably some radical leftist intellectual. But that's not important. What's important is what they said. And what they said was, you can't tell me who you're willing to fight for unless you answer the question, who are you willing to fight? In other words, we live, unfortunately, in a zero-sum world. And to help someone is to hurt someone else, unfortunately, right? And that's kind of true in hi-fi as well. These companies that have been around for a long time, they don't want to chase away an aging demographic of audiophiles who probably can't hear above 8 kilohertz anyway. Unfortunately, a lot of those people, we have this troll on the Soundstage Network, Ernie Fisher, I think his name is, he wears a stupid hat. And
we're going to bleep that out, because the best way to deal with trolls is just not to...
We're not going to bleep that out, because it needs to be called out. I love fighting with this dude, but he always got mad at me and Brent when we were doing this podcast, and he gets mad at anybody who tries to make hi-fi more convenient. He doesn't want hi-fi to be more convenient, because for him, it's part of his identity. His identity is built on, I've done the hard work. I know how to set up a stereo system. I know how to get good sound. And you people just want to make it more convenient. And unfortunately, I'm not saying he's the majority. I'm not even saying like he's a big contingent. But the problem is, any hi-fi company that is going to do anything to make audio more accessible and more understandable is going to anger people like him, who actually legitimately view convenience as a bad word. They get angry at convenience because they've paid their dues. And if you don't want to pay your dues and do the hard work to dial in hi-fi to perfection like they did, then you can just get off their lawn. So it is a tough position for a hi-fi company to be in. And I think, and you get the brands that stand out to me are the ones that have somehow magically managed to sort of thread that needle and have managed to add convenience features without tarnishing their brand with people like that. But I have to say, if I were running a hi-fi company, I think that would be a question I would have to ask. Do I try to make this inviting to new people without angering the old people? I'll give you an example of why that's relevant. And it ties back into this article, actually. So a while back, JBL, I think it was, put out some ads that specifically targeted, I want to say, millennials. And it was
I know exactly what you're talking about.
It was kind of a jokey ad, and it was a little cringe in its use of jargon and stereotypes and things like that. I kind of think that was intentional, right? I kind of think it was an attention grabber, but apparently it focus tested pretty well. But man, it made some old people mad, because it's like, how dare you try to attract young people? I think that was the problem. And a lot of them couched it in terms of, the slang, the jargon, they're tearing at their phones, the stereotypes. But they were just mad that JBL was trying to attract a younger audience, I think. But what's funny is the young woman that I was talking about that sort of kickstarted this article, Angelica, whom I speak with every week when I go to the Y, she knows JBL as a brand. Like, when I asked her what brand her little cheap Bluetooth speaker was, she's like, I don't know. It's just like all capital letters. It makes no sense, right? And then she talked about
Wish.com or something, Amazon orders. Yeah.
Yeah. There's all of these, drop ship companies. Basically, they want to register a trademark in the US. And the easiest way to do that without having to think about it is let's just get 4 or 5 capital letters that make no sense. And that's our brand now. But JBL, she knew. She's like, oh, we got the new speaker in the lobby. It sounds great. And it's JBL. And I was like, wait a minute, hang on, back up. Like, how do you know? You don't know the name brand of your own speaker at home, but you know JBL. And she was like, oh, JBL makes great headphones. And it's like, wow, okay. I've always been sort of skeptical of this notion of, and Bowers and Wilkins has done a lot of this. Like Bowers and Wilkins came out with the Zeppelin ages ago, which
cool looking.
It was, but probably way earlier than you can remember. The first Zeppelin was like an iPod dock with the old 30-pin connector, and you had to actually drop your iPod onto it. This was way pre-iPhone and things like that.
Do you remember the iPod Hi-Fi?
Oh yeah. And a lot of people were skeptical. Like, is this doing anything to bring people into hi-fi? Because it's just a stupid convenience thing. And now this has got me rethinking. Like, she knows JBL, and the reason she knows JBL is because they're like amongst the few headphones that she's tried that don't suck, right? And so her first impulse is, well, if I were going to go. And she said this at one point, and I just laughed. Like, she was like, do they make like regular speakers? And I'm like, oh God, I can feel my bones getting less dense as we have this conversation. But to her, JBL is an amazing headphone company. And now she's kind of like, well, if they do headphones right, and they've got this little wireless speaker and they do that right, do they make the big stuff? Do they make the real stereo stuff? And I'm just like, yeah, they do. Yeah, they do. But
and I guess this kind of goes to that thought that I have, which is that's somebody that cares about audio or notices kind of a lack of good quality audio. Now,
the way she describes it is interesting, and it was fascinating to me. And I'm trying to internalize and synthesize a lot of this, but she doesn't know what frequency response means. She doesn't know what neutral tonal balance means. But she was talking to me in terms of what she liked about this JBL speaker, and she's like, the kick drum doesn't sound too loud or too quiet compared to everything else. And the guitar sounds like it's in the right. It sounds like it matches the vocals. And what she's saying is it's got a pretty neutral frequency response. But she's never been exposed to that terminology. But just intuitively, she knows a speaker that doesn't have egregious coloration sounds better to her. And she's articulating that with the limited vocabulary that she has. But here's the important takeaway. It is super important to her, right? If the tonal balance is not neutral, she's immediately like, nope, this sounds like crap. And you could talk about all of the other things, and she kind of threw out some words, and it's like, I don't know about that, and I don't know about that. But if the tonal balance isn't good, and if it doesn't have good dynamics, she might not know why she hates it, but she hates it.
So in order to kind of know what you like, there has to be some reference to know what's not good, and then some reference to be like, oh, that sounds right. Yeah. So whether she's gotten that reference from either like a live show or like has been somewhere that has good quality speakers and she just doesn't know what they are or whatever. But that is kind of like you need that point of reference to be able to understand, okay, this was significantly better in terms of experience than this other one. And for me, like I've been filming in hi-fi more than I've kind of gotten into this as a hobby. But I remember the first kind of experience that I had where I was like, this is amazing, was listening to those Kef blades in England. Yeah. And I just remember being like mind blown, like this is nuts. Like this is unlike anything I've ever heard before. And I had heard high quality systems at the time. But that just was kind of like a new point in the sand where I can say, all right, like I need to aim for this going forward. And that's why I kind of, or that's how I started kind of exploring that. If people are never exposed to anything like this, then will they ever know that they're missing out?
That is it. That leads right into another encounter that I had that I talk about little bit in this story. I didn't talk about my experiences with my friend William as much because he was very uncomfortably being recorded. And I respect that fully. But William is, the first two people I talked to in this story are in their 20s, right? But William is 61. And William came to me one day when we were in the locker room, and he was like, hey, I've heard you talking about, what you do for work. And he's like, I still got all of my old records, but I hadn't had a record player in years. Like, where do I go to buy a record player? Because I went to Walmart and looked, and the record players that they got ain't no count, which is sort of a Southern way of saying they're crap, right? And he was like, but where do you go to buy a good record player like we had when I was a kid? And I sent him up the road to Classic Audio and Records, which is a vintage hi-fi shop and also a record store. And, he came back the next day and he was all deflated, and he was like, man, I forgot I need like an amp and all of this stuff. And so I was like, well, crap, I've got an old Sony integrated amp I've been looking to rehome for a while because it's just behind the times in terms of digital connectivity. It's not useful as a reference amp because it's underpowered. But I was like, do you have speakers? And he's like, oh yeah, I've got speakers in the attic. And I talked to him about what they were, and I was like, this amp will work for you. And he was like, great. And he was like, I'll get a record player soon. And then I saw him a few weeks later, and he was like, no, I can't. My truck's busted. I can't afford the record player. So I'm going to give that amp back to you. And I'm just like, William, why don't you just use the amp, buddy? Just use the amp and enjoy music from your phone until you can afford a record player. And he was like, wait, what? And I'm like, yeah, that amp's got Bluetooth. And he was like, well, what do I need to buy to make that work? And I'm like, no, it's got Bluetooth built in. And he was like, well, what do I have to buy to make it work? I'm like, well, you use an iPhone. He was like, yeah. I was like, you got music on your iPhone? He was like, yeah. I was like, I've seen you wearing Bluetooth headphones. He's like, yeah. So wait, that can talk to the amp that you gave me? And I'm like, yeah, it's the same. Just like you're connecting to headphones. That's how you connect to this amp. And the next time I saw him, he was just glowing. And we talked about it a little bit. And he was like, man, it's just, things are too complicated these days. And he was like, right. The bigger problem is, he's like, you just don't, he was like, back when I was a kid, you go into Sears and Roebuck or Montgomery Ward or whatever, and you could just look and go, oh, that's a stereo system. Like, I can see it. I can look at the back of it and see how it's all hooked up. You're exposed to it. And then you put it on layaway. And then when you get it paid off, you bring it home and it's just all, you got it all, and you hook it up and you listen to it. And he was like, and then I grew up and, I'd go to Circuit City because I need a new refrigerator. And, oh, look at that. They got stereo systems over there. They got speakers. And he was like, where do you see that stuff today? He's like, I can't keep up with it because you don't see it anywhere. He's like, and I think that's a bigger problem too. And I think it plays right into what I'm talking about. Like, you no longer see the stereo system in my house unless you're coming back to my office, right? And then I think that's true of a lot of hi-fi enthusiasts. So normies who could be brought into the hobby just aren't exposed to it. They don't see it. And what you don't see and what you're not exposed to, you're just not familiar with. And it seems more complicated than it even is. So
what? And here's the thing. I think about companies like Devialet, right? Mm-hmm. You mentioned Bowers and Wilkins, and I mean, there's a few in there as well. But Devialet makes products that I would say more people have probably seen those speakers and looked at them and been like, what are those? Like, those look crazy. Yeah. And then may have gotten into those speakers or who knows, because I mean, the price point is something that not everyone can necessarily afford, but they're focused on technology first in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think they kind of push their sonic quality as much as their ease of use and kind of their integration and their style and all of that, which is all kind of getting to the point of like, is this idea that companies focus only on the quality of sound actually a lasting approach to kind of keeping customers coming? I know for me, like, I need to balance the sound quality with all of these other things. And if I don't understand all this stuff in the middle, and the resources aren't readily available, and the pitch from the company is, well, you need to buy all this stuff. I might just skip it entirely and go to something that is completely inclusive, even if it is at the cost of less quality.
Right.
So I don't know. Like, is this stuff in the middle important? Are we going to see more companies kind of going away from that entirely to these like fully active speaker systems or less boxes? Or is there kind of ways that people can be indoctrinated into the elite world of hi-fi enthusiasm?
Well, one of the ways that I wrapped up the article is saying what I'm taking from this for now is I'm going to be focusing more of my energy on just add speaker systems.
Okay.
Where it is an integrated amplifier with built-in streaming capabilities, and all you've got to do is plug it into the wall, maybe plug a source device or a network cable into it, and add some speaker cable and some speakers, right? I'm going to focus more of my energies on those because I call them training wheels, Yeah. And the reality is, and I want to be careful to use this phrase as intended, not the way it's going to be taken. For some people, that's good enough. And I don't mean it is lacking in some way. I don't mean it is inferior. I just mean it gets the job done, and it gets the important part done in that they now have access to higher quality sound in the room, which I truly believe is a quality of life concern. Like, this is not just a hobby for me. You and I, off air, we're not going to air all of our dirty secrets, but before this, we were talking about what a stressful day I had yesterday, right? I mean, I got to the point to where I was ready to just watch the world burn. And at the end of the day, I went to my office and I dropped the needle on a Circles Around the Sun record, and I sat in front of my speakers, and I could feel my blood pressure going down in real time. I think having high quality sound in the room is not just a hobby. It's not just an audiophile pursuit. It is important, right? And so any barriers to entry that I can help remove in that front, yes. And these all-in-one systems may be looked down on as inferior to old school audiophiles, but they are at the very least, training wheels, right? They expose people to the kinds of connections that they're going to have to rely on more of if they want a more component system, whatever. They understand, this is the difference between a speaker cable and, an interconnect like an RCA cable, because you'd be amazed by how many people are just confused by that. Go on Reddit, look at, r/vinyl, and there are people going, which cables do I plug where? Like, why do these cables look different? Like,
let's talk about cables for a moment.
Yeah.
Because here, and this also resonates with me entirely. If you think about the amount of different ways that you could connect speakers these days, now we can go into the pro audio space and start talking XLR and all of that stuff. We can talk about quarter-inch jacks, right? And then you go all the way to, like, it's boundless. You can get straight up, banana plugs and speaker wires and all of that stuff, or RCAs and whatever. And not all of them, I'm going to say not all of them are created equal. And not all of them that fit actually do what you need them to do.
Yeah.
So when you start, and sometimes there's multiple connections, and I would feel that as well. Like, I look at a set of speakers and I'm like, well, shit, like, which one do I use? And why would I use one over the other?
Right.
And even if I had all the components, trying to figure out how to connect all of them in order to, actually, that'd be a neat experiment. You give the woman there a bunch of components. You give her a phono stage, a preamp, an integrated amp, speakers, all of that, and all the wires, and say, like, see if you can make it work with the record player and all that. See if you can make it work. The cables might plug in to where they fit, but does that actually work?
Yeah.
And this kind of, for me, it ties back to this ease. I don't know if there's a way to kind of overcome that. I don't know if there's standards, but there's multiple standards, and they each have their advantages and disadvantages. And
I feel like one problem here, though, is you are one step ahead of the problem that I'm addressing, in that, like, I'll give you an example. Like, when I got a record player, my wife, for the first time, was interested in what I do for a living. Like, for the first time, right? Because she was super excited about the idea of being able to listen to records. And she was like, how does this work? And I just I was like, it's very, very simple. In my system, simplicity rules. So here's what you need to do. Like, let me show you the mechanical stuff of how to put a record on properly, how to run the static brush over it, how to drop the stylus, make sure the stylus drops onto the record, all of that. And she was like, yeah, okay, yeah, oh, that makes sense. Yeah. And then what you do, sweetie, is you push the phono button on the integrated amplifier. And she's like, wait, what?
Big words.
What is an integrated amplifier? And I'm like, it's this box right here, this black box. This is an integrated amplifier. And she's like, why do you need that? Like, why does that? And I'm like, okay, you don't need to understand. All you need to understand is see the button that says phono. If you push that, then speaker makes sound. Just push that, and then put the record on the record player and lower the stylus, and you're good. And she's still to this day like, wait, what is an integrated amplifier again? And I run into this problem with my dad all the time. He's like, what's that black box that makes all the sound? And Pop, that's an AV receiver. Yeah. I think that's broke. And it's like, no, it's not broke. Your house cleaner probably just knocked the IR repeater off the front or pushed the wrong button or something like that. And he's like, well, can you come fix it? And he'll ask me, could you show me what you're doing? And I do. And by 3 hours later, he's forgotten all of it. So yeah. So the points that you're raising are important. They're very important, but we're not there yet. We've got a step to accomplish before we get to the problems you're talking about. It's more fundamental than that.
Well, and here's the thing, like I see that. I'm just looking at it from the point of view of like, is there a way to avoid all those entirely and just go to a system that focuses on ease for the I'm going to say this generation, but it's for people that don't have the background in, I mean, years in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s of like plugging everything together.
Oh, they're out there. They're out there and they're plentiful. We just need to talk about them more, and we need to not treat them as less than. We need to not treat them as, oh, well, this is just good enough for the plebs, right? This is good enough for those normal people. No, we need to treat them as legitimate audio products, which many of them are. Many of them are fantastic, right? So I think it is a change in attitude on our part, because people are already making the solutions that you're recommending, but we treat them as if they're not good enough.
Well, and I'm gonna go ahead. I'm gonna call it the PSP Alpha IQs. These speakers are freaking amazing, and they have a phono stage built in. You can plug in a record player directly to it.
Yep.
Like, it doesn't get much easier than that. It's a single connection. You can't mix up the cables. It's literally plug and play. Will it give you the best phono stage? Will it give you the best reproduction of your records? I'm gonna go ahead and say probably not.
Why not?
What
does a phono stage do, and what does it need to do, and what makes the difference between a good one and a bad one?
Well, and actually, this is a good point.
And so why do you just assume that it's not good enough? It might be. Look, the phono stage in my, very affordable NAD integrated amplifier.
More than enough?
Here's the thing. It's Diego measured it, and it is literally perfect. Like, flawless. It is absolutely flawless. Like, you could not ask for and what does a phono preamp do? What is its job to do? Its job is to apply inverse RIAA equalization, right? So a certain equalization curve is applied to records to make it to where you can press an audio signal into this, chunk of wax, right? So And basically you want a phono stage to undo that. And then it basically needs to boost the voltage and to line level, right? And those are the two things that it does. And, there's impedance stuff or whatever. It's probably getting a little too complicated. But again, the point is not that. The point is like the NAD integrated amplifiers that are out there right now, some of which are just remarkably affordable. The phono stages are literally perfect. And I have no reason to believe that they reinvented the wheel when they did this PSB speaker. It's the same company. Come on, right? Why would they not use the same phono stage? So there's a very good chance that the phono stage built into those PSB speakers that you have is perfect for a moving magnet cartridge, right? It wouldn't be good for a moving coil. That's a whole different thing. You're not going to get into that anyway. Nobody's buying those speakers, cares. But for most cartridges, that phono stage is probably perfect.
Well, and I guess so
don't assume that it's not.
Yeah, there you go. And you called me out on it, and it is something that I need to reflect on. And part of it may be that I'm so exposed to what a huge amount of audio companies offer that I assume that a speaker system in the whatever $1,500 range would not have the absolute best of each and every component. But I mean, for me, more than enough. For my wife, she's like, wow, like these sound really nice. Like she notices the difference between the Bose stuff and even between we have whatever they are, the Kef eggs, the kind of cool looking speakers too. She notices the difference. I guess for me, because I know a little bit, I don't know a lot, but I know a little bit, I assume that it's not going to be as high a quality or the best that's out there. But to your point, like for 99.9% of people, that probably will do it and then some. Yeah.
And let's not look down on them for that. Even if it's not perfect, even if it's not right, like the PSB and NAD like circuit, which is just measures perfectly. Like even if it's close enough, that is still an elevated experience. That is still bringing people into the fold rather than putting up a gate and saying, no. You stay on the normie side of this gate because I'm better than you, because I already know all this stuff, right? And there's just far too much of that in our hobby.
So, and then I'll kind of pose this, which kind of circles a lot of this stuff together, which is when you look at companies like Apple, right? So you have Apple, you have their HomePod Mini, their headphones and all that. In the audiophile space, people are like, they're shit. They don't sound good, right? When I look at that and I say, well, they are convincing people to spend more money than the whatever $15 headphones that they could get at the grocery store or the speaker off of Amazon with a bunch of capital letters arranged that nobody knows what it is. Could that be kind of a gateway into higher quality sound? It's probably not the best sound. It might be, like you said, good enough for a lot of people. But if somebody's starting to consider that, maybe they start looking at other options. Maybe they say, well, I mean, like if I'm spending, I don't know what the AirPod Max are now that they finally have a USB-C, but if somebody's spending $400 or $500 or whatever it may be on a set of headphones, maybe look around and see what else is out there. And then they say, well, I mean, PSB is one company that makes really great headphones. There's so many others.
Yeah, maybe.
Is that not a gateway?
Maybe. Yeah.
And then the other kind of element of that is I truly think a lot of where the audiophile companies from my side of it, if they don't kind of play into the ease of things, then you're not going to kind of bring people over that are so used to companies like Apple or Samsung or whoever it may be that have all these features to make your life easier. These like switching sources on the go, and you take the headphones off and they automatically stop playing so that you're not losing your place in line. All of these little things, and there's equivalent technology in speakers, HDMI ARC or eARC, great examples. Like, I think that ease of use is another area where a lot of these companies can focus on, and that brings people into it. And then you can start explaining to them, okay, well, this is our all-in-one system. This is as easy as it gets. If you want, you can start mix and matching and playing.
Maybe. Yeah.
Anyways, that to me, and I think about you mentioned the JBL ad earlier. That JBL ad, from an audiophile perspective, is kind of a joke because
it was kind of cringe. I mean, come on, but it worked.
It was cringe, but you have to think about it from the point of view of people that don't know about audio being somewhat educated into the audio space.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, I look at that and I look at some of the other stuff, and knowledge is power. And if people don't know, then they don't know. You don't know what you don't know.
And at least people were talking about it. I mean, when's the last time you heard anybody talking about unfortunately, when's the last time you heard anybody talking about a PSB ad or a KEF ad or whatever? I mean, I wish they were, but at least people were talking about the JBL ad. And at least it was, look, as gross as I find, advertising and consumerism and all of that, apologies to anybody who doesn't want to hear me rant, but you got to get the message out and you got to let people know what exists. And JBL did that in a way that maybe we all need to be looking at and taking a lesson from. So.
Yeah. And the other bit that I would say there is thinking about it, I think companies do have a huge responsibility to explain what components do, the advantages of the components, and how they all kind of work together.
Yeah.
Not even related to their own products per se, but just so that the knowledge of what all this stuff is can kind of be brought forward to more people. And I think that in general would probably lead to a little bit more in the way of sales, because once a company is in your trust books, you're more willing to buy from them. I see that as a path forward.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
absolutely.
Just me. Anyways, to skip our normal question, because we've done this a fair bit. I was
prepared for it too.
Were you? Okay, well, I'm gonna tweak it a little bit.
Okay.
Is there a particular song or songs, albums, artists that you're listening to right now that you're like, oh, I'm really jamming out to these folks or whoever it may be?
So, kind of, but I've come about them in a roundabout way. My wife, this is going to make sense in the end, I promise. It's going to sound like I'm smelling burnt toast, but I promise I'm getting somewhere. So my wife has basically appropriated my PlayStation 5.
Nice.
Because she is super hooked on Baldur's Gate 3 and she's deep into Act 3 now. And she is like, if there's a spare moment, we're not watching the TV show. She's like, I'm playing Baldur's Gate, get out. So I have been back at my computer and I can't afford new games right now. So literally the last video game we bought was Baldur's Gate 3 a year ago. So I've been digging back into an old game that I'd kind of abandoned that has gotten so much better in recent years called No Man's Sky, which is a really, really great sort of universe simulator, for lack of a better word. But the soundtrack to it, actually there's a band called 65 Days of Static that their music inspired the game in a lot of ways. And then the developers asked them to score the game. And I've just been so exposed to that music because that is the game that I'm playing right now, that I've been listening to their music. And right now, one of the ones that I've got on repeat is called Utopian Frequencies, which is kind of a compilation album of theirs of stuff that just wasn't a whole album before, and they collected it together and made an album, and it's their latest piece. But it is post-rock, if you're into that jam, which means, it's the instrumentation of rock music, but it's not rock music. And with 65 Days of Static, it's a very sort of, it's very ambient and very soundscapey. It's very sound focused music, if that makes sense. The sonic landscape and the textures of the instrumentation are almost more important than the melodies and the harmonies and the composition and things like that. So just to de-stress, I spend a lot of time listening to the soundtrack of No Man's Sky, even when I'm not playing No Man's Sky, but that's leading me to branch out and listen to more of the music of 65 Days of Static. And right now, I think Utopian Frequencies is the one I'm vibing the hardest with.
Love it. I'm adding it to the playlist.
Cool.
All right. With that, thank you so much, and we'll talk soon. All the best.
Thanks, buddy.